Hey there, courageous leader. Looking for a place to connect, share, and collaborate with other ambitious, impact-driven powerhouses? Well, look no further. Join me and dozens of other bold, action-oriented women in leadership in the Lead Hers Lounge. The Lead Hers Lounge is a no-cost monthly meetup for listeners of the show and my broader She Leads community so that we can come together and uncover opportunities to collaborate with each other and magnify our impact. We meet monthly on the fourth Wednesday of every month. Details to save your spot for the next no-cost meetup is in the show notes below, or you can head over to SabineGideon.com/lounge to register. Again, that's SabineGideon.com/lounge to register and save your spot. I'll see you in the lounge. Thank you for joining me on another episode of She Leads Now podcast, where we help career and entrepreneurial women gain the tools to develop a success mindset, create winning strategies, build collaborative relationships, and take bold action towards creating impact and fulfillment in their lives and careers. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I'm on a mission to awaken and activate women and emerging leaders so they can tap into their innate leadership ability, elevate their influence, and create the impact they were destined to make. If you're ready to uplevel your confidence, courage, and influence, you've come to the right place. Join me weekly for insights, strategies, and resources to help you grow, develop, and embody the leader you were meant to be, so that you can make the impact you know you are called to make and establish the legacy you've always dreamed. The world eagerly awaits the emergence of your brilliance, impact, and influence. So with that, let's dive into this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of She Leads Now podcast. Joining me today is Katie Burkhart. Katie is a serial entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, a minimalist designer, jargon slayer, and sharp communicator. She's also the mastermind behind MatterLogic. And today she's really going to be talking to us about how to make the most of your time. And so I'm so excited to get into this conversation. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, same here. So without further ado, I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about what you do today, because you do a lot. And also, what are some of the key things that led you to stepping into this place of being a serial entrepreneur?
Absolutely. So I think it all really started with my very first job, which was as a lifeguard at the pool I used to go to as a kid. By the time I actually got to be the really cool lifeguard, a great deal less people actually came to the pool. And so I spent a lot of my time looking at an empty pool and watching the time tick by. And what I determined, even as a high school aged kid, college aged kid, was I don't have any problems working hard for a living, but I really don't want to work in a job where I'm literally watching time pass by that I will never get back. I need to do something where I'm really engaged, I'm really excited, I'm really contributing. I get to the end of the day and I feel like that was a really good day. Flash forward, post-college, I was working at a job which I was very excited about. I was working really hard, really wanted to contribute, but I happened to be working with a manager who was an extreme micromanager. And while people are like, well, that must have really hurt your feelings. I'm like, my feelings were not the issue. My issue was she was preventing me from doing a good job because she would randomly pick things to focus in on and not really give any good reason for why this was the priority. And as a result, it was really difficult for me to meet her expectations and feel like I was keeping the project on track the way I needed to. And that was a really frustrating thing for me. And I determined at the end that this isn't really how I wanted things to work. How could I get to a place where they didn't really work that way? And through just a turn of fate, ended up spending more time in my business, my first company, which is called Matter7, which had been working with groups that would classify themselves probably as mission-driven. Originally nonprofits exclusively, ultimately working with founders directly, who there was just always a little bit more to their business. They weren't really there to do widget making. They were there to do something beyond simply widget making and needed help telling their story, which is really what we focused on. It's what we focus on today. How do you tell people who you are, what you do, and why that matters? What we found in that process was that once we had set up those pieces, organizations had a very hard time making decisions against them and actually shifting to run their business in a way that made sense with the story they told. And very quickly, you'd end up with a disconnect, and then they'd have to redo the story again. Like, it just ended up being this not particularly productive cycle of actually doing what it is that they came to do in the first place. And so as someone who is a minimalist designer in sort of the broadest sense of the term, I ended up backing myself into the purpose-driven model and saying, okay, we really need to help you understand how you do things so that there's a point to everything that you're doing every day. And that's what my second company works on. And through our proprietary system, actually works with organizations to say, let's really take this and break this all the way down into whether or not we should even have this meeting today, to make sure that you're really making the best use of your time. You're really valuing the people that you work with and really delivering value that matters at the end of the day.
I love that. So it sounds like, just based on your own journey, you were in a space where, you felt disconnected, if you will, from the work. Like there was no purpose, there was no meaning to it. And so you've kind of navigated your career and then started a business that now supports organizations in getting that clarity and actually living it out. How much of that, that teenage girl do you find showing up on a regular basis where, like, as you're working with clients, like you go back to, okay, I remember what it was like to work in an organization or to work in an environment. And so I'm bringing that experience to help shift to make it better for the other employees.
Absolutely. Every day I had a conversation with a team member a couple of days ago who said, the client, this was a Matter 7 client, had said, we have this opportunity. We're going to have a camera on site. Is there other stuff we want to do with video? And he just sort of looked at me and was like, I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. And my immediate response, without even thinking, was to very bluntly say, well, what's the point? And that gets back to that time issue. I could spend all day interviewing people aimlessly about all sorts of different things, and I would have terabytes of video content, but that may be a complete waste of time if we don't understand the point of interviewing them in the first place. Is there some goal we're trying to achieve? Does it help us to meet our outcomes? Is there, a reason that we're actually taking the time to put this video content together? And once that stops wasting time, you're also going to get a better end product, because we can think about, in this example, who are you going to interview? What specific questions are you going to ask them? What are we going to do with the footage at the end of the day? So it ends up being just better time spent as well as better results.
Yeah. And so you bring me back, or something that you said made me think back to a talk that I had recently where it was talking about, how do you create this sense of belonging in organizations, especially in the environment that we're in right now, where people are working remotely, like a lot more disconnected than connected because the building isn't there, if you will. And one of the things that I spoke to is that this is a period where organizations and leaders specifically need to double down on that North Star, and not only just double down on it for pretty marketing material, but double down on it in decision making, double down on it on how they treat the employees and how they communicate it. So it sounds like a lot of what you're doing today is, one, reminding or helping them to identify what the North Star is, and then creating systems and processes for them to actually live it out, if you will, in their day-to-day business operations.
Absolutely. It's all about being really clear on what value do we deliver, and then how do we make sure that everything we do allows us to deliver that value better and better and better. And as far as connectedness goes for your team, the first place where you deliver value is to your customer or your beneficiary, whoever you serve. But you also deliver value to your team. Number one, most foundational way you say, I value you, is to pay you well, which we're seeing in the Great Resignation. For as much as we talk about meaning, and I love that conversation for a vast variety of reasons, people still come back and say, I'm looking for a better paying job. Like, you are occupying what could be up to a third of my lifespan with whatever it is that I'm doing at work every day. Make sure that I have the capital to live a good life when I'm here and when I'm not. So number one. Number two is to respect their time when they're there working. Please don't ask people to do things that are a waste of their time. The third piece is then to the wasting of the time and the third piece go together, because there's meaning, as in, do I understand why I'm doing these things? Do they make sense? Because I think that's number one. Nobody wants to do things that they're like, I have no idea why I'm pushing this paper today. Absolutely nobody wants to do that. The second piece of it is to say, how do you connect their purpose to whatever you're doing as an organization so that you can make sure that you're helping them to feel really fulfilled at work? And there's a couple of levels that go to that. One, you want to make sure that they're getting to better themselves. They're getting to learn new skills. They're getting to master new skills. They're getting to improve themselves as an individual, whatever that means for them. But it's also something where they're getting to find that meaning for them. And I think this is where we have to be really careful that not every one of your teammates is here because they want to save the world. Some people are really excited to come to work and be enabled to do the best job they can. And that's what's really meaningful for them. Other people are coming to work because they really want to make sure that they're providing well for their family and they have the time to spend with their family. And that's good also. So taking the time to really meet one-on-one and understand what's motivating your team members individually is what's going to help you to best connect them and see how they fit into what you're doing collectively.
Yeah, that's a really great point, or interesting point, I should say, because I'd love to have this conversation around what's important to employees, right? And we know that there's no one size fits all. And of course, people generalize all day long. But, I always think back to that meme that's always out there that people don't leave companies, they leave managers, right? People aren't leaving because of money. They aren't leaving because of benefits. They aren't leaving because of these things. There's something within them that is missing, right? Or the relationship that they would want is missing. So it sounds like your philosophy is more around, yes, meaning is important, but that's not necessarily the end all and the be all, right? Like you create some level of meaning and you allow, people to attach to it based on what's important to them. But you're also saying not to neglect the actual physical things too, like the money, like the benefits, like the time off and so on. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, because what you're looking at is you're starting to treat your people as someone, not something. And I think historically, we've treated people as things, as part of our greater business machine. And that's really a noisy way to look at your people and not overly productive because they're human beings. Part of their purpose, individual purpose in some levels is more complex than organizational purpose because it will shift over time. It'll shift as they develop. It'll change depending on what's going on in their life to some degree, not necessarily like you wake up today doing one thing and tomorrow being, totally on something else. But there are those people who have pretty dynamic shifts, as well as that the range of what people value individually is quite different. But what we need to make sure we're being really mindful of is that there's not, the goal of being purpose driven is not to get everybody to drink your Kool-Aid and spend 20 hours at work because, we are the end all be all. It's really not about you at all. It's about the fact that you're helping them to be a better person through the work that they're doing every day. And when I say better, again, that's something that's very subjective and based on what they're looking at. So how do you make sure that you're crafting a team that enables them to do their best work and to be fulfilled at work based on, what they're prioritizing? And I think one of the first steps there is to recognize that, to your point, not everybody prioritizes the same thing in the same way, but that doesn't mean that what they're doing isn't valuable or isn't important. In fact, it probably is very important. So how do we start to have that conversation as someone's versus, if I give everybody my North Star and I talk to them about it enough, all the little cogs in the machine are going to nod their head and move along. Like you're missing the idea that this is actually a human piece.
Yeah, I love that. And, I'm curious, just because you this is your wheelhouse and you play in this space and you've been playing in this space for a while, even prior to the quote unquote pandemic, or the pandemic is not a quote unquote, but the Great Resignation is the quote unquote. So even prior to the pandemic and then the Great Resignation and then everything else that they're calling it these days, we saw a shift in the workforce in terms of, millennials entering into the space and how they wanted work to integrate into their life, and certainly Generation Z and how they wanted work to integrate into their lives. So would you say, and I know this is, obviously just your opinion, but even without the pandemic and the Great Resignation, were we already tracking towards this, where like it was already tracking towards where organizations had to look beyond the tasks that were getting done or the particular skill sets to say, hey, we want someone to be part of this culture, part of this organization, and we have to meet them where they are?
So yes, we already saw that. And a lot of that came through the lens of customer, centricity and being customer centric and personalization to the customer. And we were already seeing that bleed over on personalization to the individual. We hadn't quite figured it out great. In fact, I'm still not sure we figured it out that great yet, but it had already started, right? Like Simon Sinek arguably introduced purpose in 2009, so or brought it out in a bigger way. My grandparents know what purpose is and they're in their 80s, so it's not that it's a new idea. The way I like to look at the pandemic is not to say the pandemic. I like to call that the great pause, which is what came before the Great Resignation. It's where you really forced everybody almost universally to stop and have space to think about what they were doing and whether or not it was worth it. And people are coming back with different degrees of what that means. For some people, it's like, I got to do like a total 360, I need to be doing something with climate change because that's my jam. For other people, that's, I need to make sure that I know every hour I'm spending at work is worth it and being in a work environment that allows me to choose when during the day I work, being more interested in the job I get done than how many hours I spend. Because that's really what I'm interested in looking at, is really what you're starting to see in this Great Resignation, I think, is that we've just accelerated it because we all took the pause at the same time versus people coming to these thoughts at very different stages, at very different points of what was going on.
Yeah, totally agree. I love the great pause, and you're absolutely right. We all of a sudden, not that we had more time, but we had time to really think through what was important. So along those lines, right, as leaders within organizations, and even those who, because of the pause, had that moment to be able to think through, who am I? What do I want? Like, what do I want my life to reflect? What's important to me? And so we have a lot of people who are coming into what I like to call the awareness of themselves. And essentially, that they are the captain of their own ship. They are the leader first within their lives, and then certainly whatever environment that they're in. Now that they've had time for the great pause, what are some of the things that you're seeing or that you are recommending to your clients in terms of helping them navigate that awareness while also navigating the environment that we're in?
I think part of what you're starting to see in a lot of people breaking off and saying, I'm going to go be a freelancer, is not necessarily that what they're saying is, I really want to build a big business. What they're saying is, I want to be able to have the autonomy to manage my time, to work with the clients I want to work with, to be able to have direct connection with the clients I'm serving. They're looking for something a little bit different. And it's because they're looking to move leadership into a skill versus feeling like these leaders, these bosses, are what's controlling, how I'm spending my time and what I'm doing every day. So I think starting to recognize that and helping people in your team to be able to embrace that is a big deal. And as a leader, that requires you to say, it's not about you. It's not about me, the leader. It's about me helping to orchestrate all the skills and talents and purposes that I have working with me and help them to put them in a position to do their best work. And how can I do that? And one of the best ways you can do that is to listen first and actually respond after you have listened. In so many cases, if you get to the listening phase, then we forget the second half of the conversation, which is, I heard you, here's what I heard, and here's what I'm going to do about it. So that we're actually having a conversation, which is a huge shift. And because the difference, or the main difference between people working as freelancers and people working as businesses, is that one, you're working largely alone. One, you're working as a collective. And what businesses have to offer that I think is particularly unique over totally working, because I've had some thought leaders suggest that we're going to go to like 100% freelance mode, like companies won't really be a thing. And I'm like, humans are social creatures. And so as businesses, what you really need to start looking at yourself is, we're a team or an organization or a collective. We are a group of people coming together around this shared purpose that we're all here to deliver this value at the end of the day. And I want to put everybody in the best position to do so. And one of the value offers I'm offering back to them is the connection to the other people. We know as human beings that we value being connected to the other people. All of us kind of living in our little Zoom boxes alone forever, I don't think is the answer. But helping people to embrace leadership as a skill and give them that trust and that autonomy and time freedom that they're really looking for, and figuring out how and when to pull them together effectively, that's really what leadership, and giving them the vision, right? The leader owns the vision and the purpose. That's what it is that you're doing when you're building a business.
Yeah, I totally agree with all those points. And so I'm curious, as you've stepped outside of corporate, you've built your own business, you've built your own teams, just looking through your journey, what were some of the key lessons that you've personally learned and taken away from that experience of becoming a leader?
Personally, I think one of the biggest things that you can do is spend a lot of time saying thank you, not to the point where it's obnoxious and loses its weight, but recognizing that even if you are, and I was just having a conversation with someone about this, even if you are just a one-person shop or a two-person shop, and it's like you and the frog in your pocket, like the frog's still in your pocket. There's always a team there. You have a bookkeeper, somebody helped you set up your website. Somebody is proofreading your articles, like at the very, very beginning, my assistant was my only team, but it was always we, because somebody there was helping me to do my work. So I think having the gratitude for that and recognizing what they're bringing to the table and that you wouldn't be able to do things without them, I think all of a sudden changes the conversation versus, they owe you something. You owe them because you wouldn't be here where you are without them. The other piece I would always leave is, as a leader, I took too long to invest in myself. And spent a lot of time figuring out like, I get this. I've read the articles, like whatever, we're going to muscle through. We're going to figure it out. I should have brought on a coach a lot earlier. I should have brought on my editor a lot earlier. These are people that help you as a partner to, think through your thoughts, put pressure on your thought process, get you to better work through whatever it is that you're doing. And I've just found that we would have cleared a lot of hurdles a lot earlier if that other person was there to push up against me and to question and to make me question myself, so that I was really pushing myself to be the best we could be. And it's sort of a silly thing. I was a swimmer for a very long time, and athletes all have coaches. So like, why would we not assume that leaders should also have coaches? It's sort of like duh, once you actually recognize it. But it took me a while. And I don't know that I was intentionally not investing in it, but it took me a while to recognize just the difference that the investment would make. And I would say to people really looking to be a leader, whether you're an entrepreneur, you're within a company, you're building that skill, or you're the leader of the ship, like remember to invest in your personal team to make sure that you have what you need.
Shout out to the coaches. And you're absolutely right. I was actually just having a conversation with someone earlier, and I was just like, yes, it's not just a saying. Like the athletes who are winning these gold medals and who are, making these millions and millions and are performing, they're doing so because they've surrounded themselves with individuals who are pushing them forward, who see their potential and who are helping to pull that out of them. And so I do think, maybe 10 years ago, coaching, as I saw it, was just reserved for the high-level executives in the company, or maybe, the individuals who are considered high potential. Whereas now you're starting to see, more and more people within organizations, as well as obviously from a business perspective, leveraging the opportunity of having a coach and the growth that comes with having a coach for sure. And so something you kind of led into my next question was around, pitfalls, right? So again, my philosophy around leadership is really that it's an identity. And yes, there are skills that you can build and that you can improve. But at the end of the day, regardless, we share that same thing. It's not about the title, because you can be leading in your household, you can be leading in your community, in your organization, and so on. But Generally, right, if you are leading an organization, whether that's a corporate environment or your own business, there's a lot we don't know. And there's a lot that we have to learn the hard way. So thinking through maybe even your experience or just based on what you've seen in the marketplace with leaders that you've supported, what are some of those initial pitfalls that you've identified?
Say no more, which is so important. It's like one of the key shifts that we talk about with purpose-driven business is no. No is the best word. If you really want to be successful, you should say no much more than you say yes. And when you say yes, you should have given that the careful consideration it requires before you say yes. Otherwise, you will end up, totally living in noise, totally overwhelmed. And it takes a long time to get out of the noise once you've dropped yourself into it. The other piece that I would give, it's not so much an early pitfall, it's like a perpetual pitfall, is I really don't like to promote myself, which is surprises a lot of people because when they ask me to speak, I'm generally pretty transparent. I'll answer whatever you ask, but I don't have a great desire to be the influencer, with my face on billboards and things like that. And so I've always shied away from, how do we market what we're doing? How do we get our unique point out there? Even though ironically, that's part of what one of my companies does for other people. And what I've learned in that is there are ways to get your voice out there that will work for you. But the longer you wait to get your voice out there, the longer it will take you to scale your reach and to really be doing the things that you want to be doing. Because if nobody knows you're here, you can't help anyone. And that's something I've had to come to greater terms with and get more comfortable doing and finding ways to do it that work for me. Some people are going to love their YouTube channel. Some people want to start a podcast, there's lots of ways to do it. Figure out what works for you. But the sooner you can start stress testing your ideas, stress testing, what it is you want to share, do it. If you're really looking to go and do that, even if it's within your organization, how do you make sure you're not making it about your ego? That's not a great idea. But how do you make sure that you're, not afraid to speak up in that meeting? You're not afraid to put the new idea forward. You're not afraid to ask the question that says, so what's the point of this? Because you need to.
Yeah, I love that. I love the one that you started off with, say no more. For sure. I always say that no is a complete sentence. And that has been in these last, the great pause that I've experienced is really around learning to set boundaries. And that goes along with that whole piece around, when you say no, when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So really carefully think through what is it that you're saying no to. And in this time of burnout being so easy, I do think that is a great area for leaders to focus on in particular. So when you think about, and just a couple last questions here. So when you think about your leadership philosophy, right, and how you operate, obviously you're going into these different organizations, you're helping them get clear on what their purpose is, what their North Star is, how to communicate that, how to live that out. When you think about your own leadership philosophy and how you've developed over time based on your own experiences and what you've seen from others, how would you define your philosophy and or your style?
I don't know that I've ever done that. Other than to say the style that I try to teach everybody else, which is respect people's time. And if that's my team, do I need to put you all in this meeting today? Or is there a better way I can get you that information? Is there something I can do to make you more successful? Can I protect you against the client who's making unreasonable demands? I don't ever want people wasting time. Conversely, I don't want clients wasting time. So we spend a lot of time, regardless of which company you're on, saying, what's the point of this? How are we going to make sure that this is really going to move the ball forward? And have spent a lot of time, not being as interested in how cool we can say it or how, many data sources we can cite to prove our own point, but really getting comfortable that our role is to synthesize all that down into something people can actually use, because that's what really matters at the end of the day.
I love your focus and your emphasis on the value of time. I think that so many of us take for granted that it is a valuable resource. Just like money is, we protect money, we protect all these other things. And so really shifting into a mindset where you see time as true currency and you're looking to maximize it or multiply it just like we would money. So I love that focus. Just a couple last questions as we're running out of time here. With regards to book recommendations, I am a firm believer that leaders are readers. So I would imagine that there are some books that you've read, or maybe one book in particular that stands out to you as a repeated go-to, or this is one that had a big impact on my journey.
I read so much, it's a really hard question to answer. Based on a conversation that I was having on LinkedIn today, the book I'm going to point you to is, I believe it's called Everybody Writes. Yes, Everybody Writes, which is written by Anne Handley, who I've had the pleasure of meeting and listening to speak. And I have been following her newsletter for a couple of years. And I would recommend you subscribe if you have not. But what I like about her work is she does cover writing for content marketers, et cetera. But she also covers writing for like the reality that everybody writes. And in an increasingly remote world with people saying, I don't really want to sit in 8 hours worth of meetings today, you are going to have to figure out how to write a productive email. Like it sounds incredibly lame, but that muscle, I think we've let a lot of us have allowed that to wane versus really working to make sure that we have that where it needs to be. We left school and we're like, we're not writing our 5-paragraph essay anymore. So I'm not going to worry about it. But like you need to worry about it. And I find that she's a wonderful sense of humor. She's always pragmatic. She finds a way to tell you a story while telling you about writing at the same time. So if you haven't checked that out, I'd recommend it.
Yeah, I actually just got put onto her at the end of the year last year by someone. And what I love about her is, to your point, right? She teaches you how to write. She tells you a story, but it's her authenticity that really catches my eye. And I think that that's the thing that draws people in. Like, she is who she is. And it comes through in her written communication, which I think is an amazing skill to have and to be able to develop.
Yeah, she's my newsletter. She's talked once about having like a gray squirrel being the inspiring animal or some crap. And I was like, you're my gray squirrel, Anne. Like every time I'm working on my newsletter, I'm like, how do I make this more like Anne's newsletter? Because I just feel like she nails that her as much as you appreciate the content.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for joining us here. How can the audience connect with you? Where do you hang out on social?
I'm one of the weirdos who mostly thinks social is terrible, except for LinkedIn, which is where you can find me. And I do accept all connections, all messages. I will get back to you. So if you want to say, hey, you have a specific question, whatever, please feel free to connect with me there. The other place to find me is through newsletters. And I promise I do my very best to make sure that they are not a waste of your time, as I do with everything else. So I personally have one. I also send one every week, which isn't really a newsletter. It's actually one point I try to make every week about how to better run a purpose-driven business. And I call that Weekly Logic. So if you actually go to www.matterlogic.co/newsletters, you have the ability to subscribe to one or both. And I'd love to have you as part of the community.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We'll definitely get your LinkedIn handle as well as your website on the show notes as well. And I can attest to it. Katie and I met through networking through LinkedIn. She does respond. Reach out to Katie and learn more. So again, thank you, Katie, so much for being here today. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you all for listening to this week's episode. We will be back next week. Until then, have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of She Leads Now. Be sure to join us next week for another transformative discussion to help you grow, develop, and embody the courageous leader you've always been. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get alerts when new episodes drop, and join us for our next Leaders Lounge meetup on Zoom. Details and dates for future sessions are included in the show notes below, so take a look there or head over to SabineGideon.com/lounge to register and hold your spot for the next session. Again, that's SabineGideon.com/lounge to grab your spot. Excited to connect with you all inside the lounge. Talk to you soon.